Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Troubadour Talks. Today, I have Anne Ciccolella with me, the artistic director of Austin Shakespeare, and we are going to be talking about Henry. Henry, the short story writer from the early 1900s. And also, I might add, a personal favorite of Anne and my writer that we both love, which is Ayn Rand. And I just want to start with a quick quote from O. Henry, just to give you a taste of part of what I love about him, a major part, and we'll talk about this as we go, and why we think you should read O. Henry. And the quote is, inject a few raisins of conversation into the tasteless dough of existence. And personally, I just love that kind of idea, injecting a few. And so hopefully Anne and I will inject a few raisins into the dough of existence for you today. Well, welcome, Anne. And
Thank you.
so why for everyone out there, if you're in Austin or in Texas, again, Anne is the artistic director of Austin Shakespeare. Why or what's going on and why are we doing O. Henry? Let me put it that way today to have this conversation.
Well, we have a little a motto of Austin Shakespeare: "The bard is only the beginning."
Mm.
So we're really interested in language. So we've done, Schiller, we've done Cyrano de Bergerac, we've done Tennessee Williams, and O. Henry obviously is not a playwright. He's a prose writer. He's a short story writer, but he's one of the most celebrated short story writers ever.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew him in terms of an image of him from New York. That is, he lived in New York a lot of his later years and his more famous years, but he spent something like 12 or 13 years in Austin, Texas.
Yeah.
And one of our colleagues, Dr. Shoshana Milgram, has done some talks about that. And I bet you can find some of them on YouTube still, about O. Henry's life in Austin. But it's his writing that I really think people can find exciting. I think it was something that people read a lot in past years when they were in, later grammar school and early high school. But I feel like it's just not done that much anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully this will get some interest from our local community and from your global community.
Well, yeah, the premise of Troubadour, in my view, is to elevate life, enriching discourse and elevating discourse in life. And that, I think, is what O. Henry does probably better than almost any writer ever, short story or novels or anything. I just want to read a quick quote from Ayn Rand about O. Henry.
Oh, thank you.
Like,
sure.
She's a wonderful writer in her own right, in terms of not just her insights, but the way she puts words together, which is really important. So she says, philosophically, romanticism is a crusade to glorify man's existence. Psychologically, it is experienced simply as the desire to make life interesting. This desire is the root and motor of romantic imagination. Its greatest example in popular literature is O. Henry, whose unique characteristic is the pyrotechnical virtuosity of an inexhaustible imagination projecting the gaiety of a benevolent, almost childlike sense of life. More than any other writer, O. Henry represents the spirit of youth, specifically the cardinal element of youth, the expectation of finding something wonderfully unexpected around all of life's corners. And I just love that. And I sometimes feel like Ayn Rand is almost conjuring O. Henry a little bit in her usage of words and the way she kind of plays with words, but now she's more of a precise writer than O. Henry, of course, but just thought that was wonderful. And she's the one who introduced me to O. Henry. And I've read a lot of his stuff through because of her.
Thank you for sharing that. So that's in the Romantic Manifesto, the Ayn Rand collection of her writings on art.
Yeah, exactly. That's from her leanings in that way. Now, were you introduced by Ayn Rand, or did you know about O. Henry before?
I think I knew O. Henry from school.
Okay.
I think I read it in literature classes and stuff. I recognized it when she said it, but she wasn't the person to introduce it to me.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about we're going to start with the show you're doing. We don't talk too much about the show, but a question I did have as we go into this is an interesting thing about how are you adapting this So O. Henry has been adapted for film a few times. I remember there was a famous 1950s series of short stories done by Hollywood directors, including Howard Hawks, I believe, is a very famous director. So you have you chosen and written these, or is there a script out there that you're, because this is a theatrical performance you're doing at Austin Shakespeare?
Right. I mean, my goal, I adapted it. I adapted it from the short stories, not from another play or anything, but I really wanted to get O. Henry's sense of buoyancy. You know, he
Mm,
has such a free spirit. That was my goal. I tried to not have too much narration, but when you're adapting his short stories, there were just some sections that his voice is so wonderful. And honestly, you have to hear it. I mean, you have to have some narration. So even though I used, probably 75% of it is dialogue, probably 25% of it is music and dance and his own narration, which will be fun. So what's behind me, you were asking, is Austin, Texas,
mm.
circa 1900, when O. Henry lived here. He lived here for 12 or 13 years. And I just passed some of those churches that you see on there as I drove from downtown to you, Kirk. And that big street you're seeing is Congress Avenue, and you can see a little bit of the river
Yeah, in the
uh,
background. Okay.
in
Oh,
the
that's
background there.
Congress to your right, I think it is. Or I guess
Yes,
it's your
yes.
left.
So it's great to, yeah, it's this, right? So
Yeah.
it's great to go downtown Austin. And that's one of the things that our colleague Shoshana Milgram did, was sort
Mhm.
of walk through some of those locations. But one of the first things that you and I talked about, Kirk, when we talked about O. Henry, was the fact that there's a story, there are lots of stories about him, but a story that he carried a dictionary
Mhm.
with him when he rode on a horse. And for a little bit of time, he was in the West,
Mhm.
meaning he did actually work on ranches and so on in the West, and that he loved coming up with definitions of words, and his vocabulary in his stories. Sometimes you have to look them up. Once or twice, he makes up a word.
Yeah. Well, I think that one of the joys of reading him is the playfulness and imaginative use of language. And there's all kinds of examples of this, but why don't we jump into Cupid a la carte? And that's the first story you're starting with.
Yes,
And I don't want to open with the opening line, but there's a line that's one of my favorite all-time O. Henry lines, and there's a lot of them. Like so much of this is playful, but I'll just tell you. So, Cupid a la carte, beautiful, fun, enjoyable story about a man who's eating food gets in the way of his love, essentially, because he falls in love with a woman who cannot stand that men eat food because she's a waitress and all she thinks of them their stomachs. And it's hilarious and funny and enjoyable, and there's tragedy, and it goes up, and it's like 7 pages, right? And a lot happens in 7 pages. But I'll tell you, there's a lot of observations that O. Henry puts throughout his stories that are accurate. And to me, like, the fun of it is that he will take something that I think is a cliche way of thinking about things, but he wraps it up in some new language that's the perfect. So I'll just let me read the line and then I'll tell you my thought on it real quick. So this is in Cupid a la carte, and he says, "As soon as I saw Mame, I knew there was a mistake in the census reports. There wasn't but one girl in the United States." Now, I first off, as someone who is currently in love with a woman, this viewpoint is 100% what it feels like, right? And the cliche is like, "Oh, I only have eyes for you," right? That's how we all think, and that's the kind of boring, mundane way that our minds are, wrapped up in language. What's beautiful about O. Henry is he gives us new ways of seeing the world and new ways of like formulating, so it's fun and playful because um I think that's an important part of enjoying this dough of existence that we have.
but that structure of that was very much like his stories. He's known for these surprise endings. He called them twists at the end,
Hmm.
right? But
Yeah.
even at the end of that sentence, he gives
Yeah.
you the twist, right? That's how
Yeah.
he constructs the idea. He doesn't say, I saw one girl and I thought she was the only girl in the world,
Yes.
right? He says it must have been a mistake in the census.
Yeah. As soon as I saw Mame, I knew there was a mistake in the census reports. And yeah, and then he goes on and so to pull out what you just said, I think is really important. So part of the joy of O. Henry is not just the twist ending at the very end, which is, if you know about O. Henry, you've probably heard of The Gift of the Magi, just the only story I think I read in K through 12 school. And I won't give away the endings, so if you haven't read it, go read that. But that's a well-known story in general. Like, a lot, like, you're more likely to find someone who's read that ever, if they read anything. And again, the emphasis is always on that twist ending, and that's it. Even the adaptations, like every adaptation I've ever seen, basically takes out all the joy of the language, to make it more easily readable. And it's
That's a
like,
good
and I
point.
understand the point. I understand what they're trying to do. Like, if you're acting in a Hollywood movie, it's very hard to have people talk in the way that he does. I'll just tell you, I had the experience recently of reading an O. Henry short story to somebody, and it's actually a little challenging to read it out loud to some degree, because it's great to read in your head and just kind of sit with it and read with it. But man, like, it's got some tongue twisters in there. I don't
Well,
know if
he's
you agree.
heightened language, right? I mean, he really does want to use great language. And I think, if you read it on an ebook and you can look up some words, that's great. But as you said, I mean, long stories for him are 7 pages, but many of them are 3 and 4 pages long.
Yeah.
So I just encourage people. I hope today will inspire people to go look. I will say, Gift of the Magi is a number of versions of it are on YouTube, from what Kirk is saying about. But we really try to keep his dialogue.
Yeah. No, I
You
noticed.
know,
So I saw the script. Would you be mad if I read the first line, or
not
do
at
you want to
all,
read
not at all.
So this is from Cupid a la carte. I also love this line. So Cupid a la carte is one that I've always loved. I think I've also loved The Last Leaf. And then that now has a lot of personal attachment to that one. And then I've always loved Princess and the Puma. Do you have favorite O. Henry short stories?
Well, I thought about Princess and the Puma, but just to do that as a on stage thing is, just wasn't realistic for me to do it. But read that first line.
Okay, yeah, the first this is great. So this is how you're going to open the whole thing. So this is wonderful. So it's Jeff Peters saying, "The dispositions of woman run regular to diversions. What a woman wants is what you're out of." And I can keep going. He goes on like that. Uh, but again, I think there's a lot of us, a lot of men maybe will have, and I bet basically can definitely say that that's how it feels sometimes to fall in love with the woman, is like, what she wants is what you're out of. And I think that, he does that all the time. He just like snaps those off over and over again. And, it's just worthwhile to experience O. Henry, read one or two of his I call them poems almost. There's kind of a poeticism to him, his short stories, every
Well,
week
he's
or two.
written like 600.
Yeah.
So, there's just fun to just pull one out and see how you like it, and know that the meal is going to go on and on and on, right? There's lots to read.
So in Cupid a la carte, I want to try to help. I want to try to inspire people to read this. Like, why should they read Cupid a la carte? And if you're in Austin, you should read the stories that Anne will be producing and directing, and then come see them so you can get more enjoyment out of it. But let's hone in on Cupid a la carte a little bit. So we've talked a little bit about some of the language, but what would you tell someone if you're saying, like, here, you should read O. Henry. There's a story we're adapting, Cupid a la carte. Do you have like a line you might tell them of why they should read this particular story, or him in general?
Well, I, I think, I mean, joy is such a strange word these days. Nobody knows what to do with it. But I will say the stories have a real sense of joy. It really is like bouncing a balloon in the air, right? And the characters are so free-spirited. Even when they're meeting with trials and tribulations, it's not like, one of the things when I first started writing, I was like, oh, things can't always be happy. It's like, well, You have to have a conflict.
Yeah.
And these people are having all sorts of conflicts. And O. Henry has a blast giving you twists and turns to the very end. And some of the endings actually are sad, but some of the endings are happy.
Yeah,
But
that's
they'll
true.
always, it's almost like reading a detective story. There's always a change that's all set up for you. And you think you know where it's going, but O. Henry is quite clever at that.
It takes a man a lifetime to find out about one particular woman, but if he puts in, say, 10 years industrious and curious, he can acquire the general rudiments of the sex. I mean, again, I just want to pepper this talk with little quotes from him because it's just so wonderful. And that again is the joy, like you're saying, of reading this story, which I'll just say that I won't tell you the ending, but the story is about a traveling salesman, right? And by the way, I'll say that there's something he sells that I actually don't know what it is. It's called like a Brazilian something. I'm like, what is that?
It's cigars.
Oh, okay. I thought it
And
might like
I
Cuban or
put it
something.
in our play so it wouldn't be such a big deal with cigars.
Okay, yeah, and I was like, I thought it might be that, like he's because it sounds like it's Cubans almost the way he talks about it, like
Correct.
Cuban
Correct.
cigars,
Correct.
Brazilians. Yeah, so he's a traveling salesman. So I think that's one reason I love this story because I have been a traveling salesman and I know this kind of idea and I connect with the character. The character is, "'Tis a misfortune of mine, begotten by nature and travel, to look deeper into some subjects than most people do." And I definitely think that I feel that way myself sometimes. Um, and so he's a man who's, traveling around. He's in Oklahoma City or in the region of Oklahoma City. And there's like these shanty boom towns from, I guess, an oil thing. And he goes to this tent because he's, again, a man who, I don't know how he puts it. I can't put it in O. Henry terms, but he loves food, basically, is how my pedestrian way of putting it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then so he loves food. He goes to this place and he falls in love with this Mame character. As soon as I saw Mame, there was a mistake. And I just want to point out, and I don't know if you have examples of this yourself or from adapting it, but one of the things he's really good at, besides the use of language, besides these twists, Zoom just did a thumbs up, is characterization in like one line. Like you get a sense of these people very quickly, not just the main character, but other characters as well. I'll give an example later, but do you have thoughts on his characterization and how he portrays
Well,
that
they're
very
really,
quickly?
we have a term that we've made a negative called caricature.
Hmm.
Well, actually,
Caricature?
yeah, like CHARITU, caricature.
Got
And
it.
that's how you really say it is caricature, but it's
I did not know
caricature.
that. Okay.
That's okay. And there's a very famous cartoonist in the theater called Al Hirschfeld,
Hmm.
and his are fantastic. They're of 20th century Broadway plays, but in a way, that is what, in a few strokes, there's a by Al Hirschfeld. There's a movie documentary called The Lion King, Line King, and
Hmm.
it's a pun on the Lion King because he has a drawing of the Lion King. But it's that whole idea that you can do something so quick and so stylized, and it nails it.
Yes. Yeah. So, I think that's what O. Henry is one of the best at, is what you're saying. Is it's basically capturing the voice and the sense of that person in just a sentence or two. And
So even though you have a type,
yeah.
but you also have very much an individual. It's not just they're
Okay,
all
yes. Yeah.
types. They're
Yeah.
a type with very specific characters.
Yes. And so like the waitress here, Mame, for instance, she has this line that I think is, and I do you have this in the script? The fried chicken, beef steak, pork chops,
Yes.
and ham, eggs, and pot pie. Like, yeah. So basically, you can't see it, but if you read it, basically, oh, Henry just typed in fried chicken, beef steak, pork chops,
So no
ham, and
breaks.
with
Yeah.
no breaks, just all one word. So I can imagine that would be fun or challenging for someone to
Yes.
kind of like read out real fast as almost
Yes.
one silent word. But I
Yes.
think in that one word and then a couple little lines here, you get a sense of this like that New York high-paced waitress who's moving around, like, oh, okay, just going from, and then everyone just turns into a stomach to her because she has so many mouths that she's giving this food out to. So you get a sense of like that's the caricature of this woman. Like you would, if you were just drawing one of those boardwalk, the exaggerated paintings, portraits of somebody, you would just have her with a port, one hand with a sandwich, another hand with soup, coffee in her, you know, waitress pocket or something like that, like just serving everybody with like 12 hands,
And
right?
she doesn't, the only negative she has toward all these guys is, well, I don't want to marry them. I don't mind serving them. I don't mind talking to them, but they're not somebody I'd want to marry. And that sort of sets up their journey.
Well, okay, so that's interesting you say that because I part of what's fun about this journey is her journey in particular, but it's also what the men do to win her affections. Can I say one thing that
Yeah.
Ed does? I won't
Yeah.
say the very ending,
So there
but
are rivals in here.
yeah, so that's another thing is there's two men, and like again, it's so beautiful. I wish I could just read the whole thing. Just go read this story. But it's really cool because they meet in between meal times. That's how O. Henry indicates that they're in love with Mame, is that they don't go when you're supposed to go, because that's when there's too many people. So they go when no one's around or when less people's around. And that's where the main character goes. And then this other guy all of a sudden comes and they are walking out afterwards like, wait a second, you're coming in between this in between meal time. I'm coming in between. Why are we doing this? Right. Oh, okay, you're after that lady who's there. And so yeah, they both are interested in the same woman, and there's a rivalry. And one of them at one point, because Mame sees every man as a a stomach, and she could never marry him, they start eating like women, they say, and they start eating like little crackers. And one of them even comes in on like leaves and comes in on what's it called? Like a curiosity. What's the word I'm looking for? Like
A sideshow.
a circus. Like
Yeah.
he comes in with the circus. He's a freak show as the starving man, as the man on a fast. And I won't tell you exactly how that ends, but you should read to find out. But it's a great, so he's like trying to win this woman, so he fasts, and then she becomes interested in him. So anyway, it's a fun thing.
It is fun. It's a lot of fun. So we have 11 actors doing many, many roles. I'll have to count up because each actor's doing 5 or 6 roles
Oh
because
wow.
there's so many short stories and so many characters. And we're also going to use projections so that we can get, sort of specific places rather than, oh, we have to change the scenery. So the style of it is very much in the style of our town in the sense that there's mime and so on.
Mm,
But I hope it will be a lot of fun. And as I said, we have a couple of musicians in it. We have lots of singers in it. We're going to have a tap dance in it. We'll have polka. We'll have waltz. So I want to keep it really that balloon in the air, as I said, lively.
that's fun. Yeah. So the one thing is, how do you get the actors in this case like memorizing lines is challenging enough. Memorizing these lines has to be really challenging. I mean, even for someone who does Shakespeare, I feel like this is even elevated difficulty. I don't know if that's true.
Well, I'll find out as I work with them. Honestly, there was one the story about Bear County where he goes to the land office. I don't know if you know it's BXAR, but you say it Bear, BXAR, and it takes place in Austin. I really wanted to do it, but it was going to have pages of narration.
Mm,
And I not only was concerned about the audience, I was concerned about the actors.
yeah.
I mean, to just memorize paragraphs and paragraphs of narration isn't much fun. It's much more fun dialogue when it's
Yeah.
going back and forth. So I think that all their Shakespeare training is really going to help them be facile with this quick talking, 1900s style when it was, stride piano and ragtime piano and that whole style.
Yeah, so it's got that kind of lively, like you're saying, buoyancy to the language, and you're trying to convey that in the actors. A man and a sausage grinder and a pantry awaken me exactly the same sentiments. I just wanted to read a line from the waitress. Uh, and so that's again, that is one of O. Henry's ways of conveying this character is not able to fall in love with men because she sees a sausage grinder in a pantry. They awake the same sentiments. She also said, I will say, and I'd be curious what you think about this. She says of, I would never marry, never will be marry a man. Do you know what a man is in my eye? He's a tomb. He's a sarcophagus for the interment of beefsteak, pork chop, sliver, and bacon and hams and eggs. He's that and nothing more. For 2 years, I've watched men eat, eat, eat until they represent nothing on earth to me but ruminant bipeds. Again, playful words all the time. But it's interesting because I haven't read a lot of criticism of O. Henry, and not criticism in terms of negative, but I mean like
No,
critical
there isn't a
analysis.
lot. There isn't a
There's,
lot. There's a
yeah,
lot about his biography, his history, his impact, but I think he wasn't taken very seriously because he was writing for magazines and newspapers.
yeah.
So sometimes when he goes on and on, it's because he's getting paid by the word,
I think, yeah, I think
you
that's.
know?
Although I wonder if they counted this as 6 words or one word. The beefsteak chops.
That's
is
right.
that
That's
is
right.
that
That's
one
right.
word or what is that?
Yeah.
Does he get paid by the letter or something?
No, he gets paid by the
Paid by the
word.
word. No, I know. So yeah, I mean, what I found interesting in that and like reading, trying to learn more about O. Henry and what is the critical analysis of him is that there is so little. Because I have read a few little comments people have had. For instance, you've kind of mentioned this, but the idea that he will take something that's kind of dreary, negative, maybe it could that subject could easily be discussed in a very serious story. And but he does it in such a light, playful way that it's, Ayn Rand's term is that he's very benevolent. It's almost like a childlike gaiety in the world, even in subjects that are serious. And just one example of a serious subject is the short story that is also in your playlist, which is The Cop and the Anthem. And the reason I think it's a little serious is, well, I'd be curious if do you think it's serious before I say it
Well,
is?
it's sad. I mean, or Henry at that period would call these people bums or hobos.
Yeah.
And we can't even call them homeless anymore. We say, people who don't have homes. But um, he really looks at it big picture. So even though he's doing something extremely everyday, I will say though, this to me of the film and cinematic things is the very best one that was ever done because
Yes.
it has a great actor in it, and
Yeah.
that is Charles Lawton.
Yeah, I remember this one very specifically, very vividly. I mean, he really pulls you in. So, the Cop of the Anthem is about a homeless person named Soapy, who's trying to go get arrested in New York so that he could spend 3 months on quote unquote the island, which is a prison, so that he can be warm, be fed, be blanketed, all that good stuff. And now, I think one again, this is one of the few times that I saw criticism in any sense, is that because the risk here for Soapy, if you think about it, is possible death. Right? Like if he does not get into prison, he could freeze to death in on the benches. And I think there's a line about that in here somewhere. In I don't remember exactly where it is, but there's a line. But here's just how O. Henry opens this again. And I'd love to get again anything you have to say about this. I'd love to hear just comments. But he says, this is a very opening line of this. Soapy moved restlessly on his seat in Madison Square. There are certain signs to show that winter is coming. Birds begin to fly south. Women who want nice new warm coats become very kind to their husbands. And Soapy moves restlessly on his seat in his park. When you see these signs, you know that winter is near. By the way, I have a different version, which is interesting. I don't like as I read that, I just realized like I have this book which has all the unabridged stuff in there, and it's a different line actually in that.
Really?
Yeah, so
Wow.
I'll try and find it, but the line about
Okay.
women who want nice warm new coats,
Yeah.
it's not like that at all. It's something like women without like uncoated women or something like that. It's very that's I did not realize this, but I've seen this before where like the online version's a little different, but I still think if you read the online version, you're fine. I think it's fine. But anyway, sorry for the tangent. I love that opening because he's basically just setting a scene. He's showing you that it's winter, and he's putting Soapy in this natural world of birds flying south and women wanting coats, so they're extra nice to they're kind to their husbands.
But he doesn't say it's winter.
And he does
He,
not.
this is
Yes,
the show don't tell, right?
yeah. A dead leaf fell at Soapy's feet. That was a special sign for him that winter was coming. And again, okay, I don't like this version because in my version it says that was Jack Frost's calling card.
Uh-huh.
So if you can get some print books, I'm not now that I'm seeing these online, I'm not liking this at all. Because Jack Frost's calling card is 10 times better than it
Yeah,
was a
yeah, yeah.
special sign for him
Well,
that winter
you'll
was coming.
see. I mean, in my version, I don't do that as narration. I do
Yeah,
that as him talking to his friend. And I gave his friend the name and they have a relationship and
yeah.
so on when they go to eat together and so on. So uh, I really try to eliminate narration when I can, but put those really clever words
Mhm.
into some really fun characters.
Yeah, and so the main reason we're doing this for everybody is to excite you about these stories and to read them for yourself. And if you're in Austin, come to Austin Shakespeare. So the fun thing about this story, even though I think some people say it does take a serious turn and or a serious background, is that all the things that Soapy does to try to get imprisoned, and of course he fails, which is funny because he's trying to get, he'll try to eat food in an expensive restaurant. It doesn't work out for him. Like all these things he tries to do, and it never works out for him. Super simple premise. Homeless man wants to get arrested. But what Henry does with it is really put it into this bright world. I like the word you're saying, buoyant, fun, light. And then he'll often put these like little nuggets of great observations about human existence, life, morality, society. Like there's all these little nuggets in there that I think are valuable observations.
Well, there's an expression in the New York area called "you can't even get arrested." You couldn't get arrested, and
Oh,
that I
really?
don't know if that's from this story where he hung out in taverns and really tried to talk to people and get a lot of the language of his period. So I wonder if it's something he picked up by ear.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, and I think so. O. Henry's life is very interesting too. Maybe we could say a quick word because that is what there's a lot of information about his life. One way to think about him as a writer is just buy a book, several books, or the whole thing that I have that has all 600 stories in it, and just read one. Like, don't think too much about it. Just read it and enjoy the language, the fun, enjoy where like the the miasma, not the miasma, the twists and turns your mind will go to try to figure out even sometimes what he's saying. Sometimes I'll read something and I'm like, I don't understand what he's saying. So I have to go back and read it again. It's like, oh, and it's like this awakening thing. And that's to me part of the fun of the adventure of reading him. So just go do that. But he did live an interesting life. And since we're in Austin, I think it's interesting maybe to say a few things. So I mean, for one, what do you know about his background and life? I mean, you've mentioned a couple things, but do you think there's anything relevant to his besides the dictionary, his background and the kinds
I
of
mean, he
stories he
had a
wrote?
very complicated life, and a lot of people don't think of him as a good man. And yet,
Why
in
is
these
up?
stories, well, I mean, he was uh, prosecuted and found guilty as a clerk in a bank when he worked as a clerk in a bank for stealing money. Now, some people think he was framed, but as he was traveling to go to court, he got on a train and left.
Mhm.
So it was like he had bail and he scooted, and then he went to Honduras,
Yeah.
and he actually has some stories about that part of the world, but hoping that eventually they'd forget his case and he could come back to the States and it wouldn't work. But then his wife got gravely ill and he
Mhm.
came back to Austin and he did get arrested and he went to prison. And they think that might be how he got the Ohio Penitentiary, was where he wound up. And that O. Henry was an anagram of Ohio Penitentiary, is one of the stories.
Hmm. Do
I
you
actually
mind?
have a different story in our play, but you'll see.
Do you know when he like what how old he was when he went to
He was
when
young.
the
He was like in his early 30s.
I thought he
And
died in his early 30s.
I think he dies in his 40s
Oh,
because
okay.
then he goes to New York. So he's
Okay.
starting to get more stories published. His editor is in New York, and he
Okay.
goes to New York and he absorbs all of these stories.
Yeah.
Um, and that's part of what happens. So that's why I associated him with New York, because most of his stories are in that. It's the Cop and the Anthem is in Madison Square Park.
Yeah, and there's a lot. I mean, there's so many good stories in set in New York. I don't remember the one where there's two friends, they leave and they promise
Oh
to
yeah,
meet. And what's that one? Do you remember that one's
yes.
called?
I don't remember the
Yeah,
title,
but
but
it's
yes, I
like
remember
yeah,
that.
two friends, they leave, they separate and they say, "Oh, we'll meet here in 10 years." And then one comes back and they come back and I won't say the story,
Things
but
are
again,
very
it's like
different.
yeah, things are very different and then it's, what are they going to do? I I mean, it's interesting about him being a good person. I don't know. Like I can imagine somebody making a really bad decision, getting punished for it, and still being a good person. I guess I find that an
Sure.
interesting assessment of him. I mean, obviously embezzling is really wrong, and he did the wrong thing.
Well, we don't know that he really did it
If he
because
did
they
it,
say that the bank
seems like he did.
was very, loose in
Yeah.
the way they kept their books at the time.
Yeah.
But also, O. Henry was an alcoholic. He dies of cirrhosis of the liver because he
Hmm.
drinks. Those taverns were a little too pleasant for him. He does marry again after his first wife dies, and he's from Greensboro, North Carolina. So there are his tomb is there, his grave is there, and
Hmm.
on his grave are many coins because of Gift of the Magi has Della counting coins. So people leave the amount of coins on his tombstone because it's
Hmm.
kind of a flat.
So
So lots of fun stories about O. Henry.
yeah. Um, yeah, there's a lot of fun stories about him. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we're ever going to be able to assess his character fully. I think the relevant detail is what he wrote. And to the degree that that was his real soul, I think he's a good person. And, if he did bad things, that's unfortunate. And I hope that he didn't do anything too egregious. I don't know, but I think the interesting thing, of course, is his stories and the way, because again, it's not just the virtuosity of his writing, as Ayn Rand puts it. It's not just the pyrotechnical. It's the benevolence. It's the even turning something really sad into something hopeful and joyous. And he even has some death in his stories, but there's something still very beautiful because the reality is that in life we do have people we fall in love with who don't love us. We do have death in our lives. We do have to deal with sickness. We do like, but it does, I think what O. Henry shows you is it doesn't always have to be the kind of morose, balled up in a corner crying type of sentiment. If you get imprisoned wrongfully or not, you could still write fun stories about a homeless person who wants to go in prison to get warm. And I think there's something very
And he
lovely and
loves
interesting.
reality. He loves all those details
Yeah,
of
detail.
reality, you know.
Yeah, it's very concrete the way that he writes. It's very specific. I mean, he has a lot of biblical, he has a lot of literary, mythical types of references, but he loves Adam and Eve and the whole picking of the apple type of thing. Like that's used throughout a lot of his stories. You see that over and over again. Well, I thought we could end by just the last leaf real quick. I don't know if you had
Sure.
before I said anything. Again, this is one that I've always loved. It means something very special to me today because of a special connection. But I'd be curious your thoughts before I said anything on this.
Well, the curator at the O. Henry House really pointed this one out, and it didn't particularly appeal to me at first. And I thought, staging this is going to be really weird. I got to have a girl in a bed, and she's got to be looking at this thing, and what is she looking at? So we'll see how it works out. But in the end, it is a really beautiful story, and it's about art. It really is about
Exactly.
art.
Yeah, I think that's the heart of it. which is to me why it's so beautiful. It's about the hope that art can give, and the putting of your life into an artwork that inspires and motivates. And sometimes that's all you can do. I'll just say that the premise of the story is two women who become friends in again, I'm just going to read the first line. Lines. These are just so
Sure,
good.
that's great. Thank you.
In a little district west of Washington Square, the streets have run crazy and broken themselves into small strips called places. These places make strange angles and curves. One street crosses itself a time or two. An artist once discovered a valuable possibility in the street. Suppose a collector with a bill of paints, paper, and canvas should in traversing this route suddenly meet himself coming back without a cent having been paid on account. Now, that's one that like I've read that over and over again. And it's a very confusing thing. And I think that last sentence doesn't even make sense, really. But there's still an image that he is putting in my head of this is Greenwich Village, right? That so to quaint old Greenwich Village, the art people soon came prowling. That's that whole description is Greenwich Village. And I just thought that was such a great little twists and turns and angles and artists going in and out. And I don't know exactly what he's talking about, but just all the images that come into mind does paint something for me.
Yeah, I think he means it to be a fantasy. So it's like you meet
Mm-hmm.
yourself coming and going. I mean, for me, the village is always like getting lost, but it's so
Mm-hmm.
fun to get lost. And those
Mm-hmm.
places he talks about are like Washington Square Place, right?
Yes, yeah, no, there's actual places he's specifically talking about. And so yeah, you have these two artists, females that come together. They go in and live together and they love art in the same way. And then right away we get Mr. Pneumonia was not what you would call a chivalric old gentleman. A mite of a little woman with blood thinned by California zephyrs was hardly fair game for the red-fisted, short-breathed old duffer. But Jonesy he smote. So Jonesy's one of the women. So basically, that's his way of saying she got pneumonia. And again, I wanted to read as much as I could today because I want you to get a sense of the language. He doesn't just say the thing. And some people have told me like, well, I don't like why can't he just say the thing? But again, that's not joyous and like you can have that in a newspaper. You have that all the time in your life. You don't go to O. Henry to see the thing. You go to O. Henry to see the thing elevated and spun up in this wonderful yarn put by a guy who's able to just spit out some cool language and put something like Mr. Pneumonia was not what you called a chivalric old gentleman, which he's not, right?
Well, and I think the play obviously will make it easier to get into it because it won't have all that.
Oh, what?
The narration we're doing is much more direct, and
Oh,
and
okay.
you'll see it happening rather than somebody telling you about it.
Yeah, I don't think you could have it like a narration. That would be, I mean, you might as well just listen to an audiobook, obviously, right? You have to do an adaptation that you're doing. I think you have to try to capture as much of the language. And I don't know if this is what you were doing, but it sounds like try to capture as much of the language as you can, and then just get it in front of people through the dialogue and the excitement and getting people
Yeah, I
into the
think there's
story
no
as much.
narration in the last leaf for me. I
Okay.
think it's all in the dialogue.
It's all in the dialogue. Okay. Are you going to use a projector for the last leaf itself?
Yes.
For the leaf itself? Okay.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. So again, this is a very short story. Everybody go read it. Go read about Mr. Berman and Sue and Jonesy and the doctor and this
And let
leaf.
us know in comments
Yeah.
if you did any of this. And maybe Kirk, could you give them a few titles in the
Yeah. I'll give you,
description
I'll send all
when you put it
the
up?
recommended O. Henry stories,
Yeah.
not recommended, but the ones that you're
Yeah.
going to be doing.
Yeah.
And I'll add a couple more.
Sure.
By the way, pimenta pancakes.
Pimienta. Yeah.
Pimienta
It's
pancakes.
a
I've never read that.
place. It's
Yeah.
in Panama. And I thought it was like pimento because, when I came to Austin, I learned pimento cheese sandwich. But no, it's pimiento.
I had never read that one. That one was a lot of fun.
Good.
um,
Good.
yeah, I mean, the Ransom of Red Chief is another amazing one. That one's so much fun. I definitely recommend that, especially if you have kids. You'll definitely love that. I read that when I was teaching at Laporte. So I was a teacher. So I don't have kids,
Wow.
but I read that one for that.
Oh,
And I
that's
also,
great.
yeah, The Princess and the Puma, wonderful ones. That one's you're not doing, but it's another one I love as well. So any last thoughts on O. Henry that you want to leave people with of you, whether you've read
Well,
it,
again,
haven't?
I think it's about, putting that searchlight on stuff that is getting lost. I feel like what's happening to all this, and reading it to your kids.
Mhm,
They can get a lot more out of it than you would think,
mhm.
and you'll definitely get a lot out of it from reading it.
Well, I'll just say on that note that I tell this to, as a former teacher, I tell this to parents all the time that oftentimes reading to your kids is not about them actually understanding every single word and every single
Uh-huh.
second. It's one about them seeing you read is a big thing, and having that connection with them. But it's also the joy and the pleasure and the fun of the words and the sounds, which is why I recommend poetry. And I think O. Henry is another great one. It doesn't matter if they understand what's going on. If you can get into the story, if you can read to them and get excited and exhilarated and, bring up the different ways that O. Henry's playing around with these words. Her old man Dugan spent his time sitting in a rocking chair memorializing the great corn crop failure of 1896. Just even that, just have some fun, and just enjoy that. I think that's a great family exercise that will have your kids fall in love with the sound of language, which is pivotal for them later grasping deeper ideas about in language and their own consciousness, I think.
Cool. Well, thanks for doing this show.
Yeah.
And I
Thank you.
wanted to compliment you on going out to the park and reading poetry with a group of people. That's great.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Now I'm doing poetry in the park. So 2024 is going to be a year of uh, literature, although they're all like that, but I definitely want to increase it. So thank you. And everybody, if you're in Austin, go. What are the dates? February
16 to 25.
16 to 25, 20. This is 2024 when we're recording this. So if you're past the 16th when you see this, sorry. Okay, Anne. Well, thank you so much. This is
Thank you.
fun.
Thanks for doing it.
All right.